This topic of making sense of modernism is intended to help us explore sort of what makes modern structures good, bad, do you love them, do you hate them, are you still trying to figure them out, what modern structures should be saved. While a lot of mid-century modern architecture has now come of age in terms of being eligible for landmark designation and also being more popular, we still have very few mid-century modern buildings that are officially recognized or protected through preservation programs, and there are still a number of challenges about how we recognize and preserve these buildings. So to help us really start off this conversation and to give us a little bit of a foundation, I'd like to invite Abby Chrisman up. Abby is a senior city planner with the Denver Landmark Preservation Program, but she's also a professor of architecture and very experienced in looking at mid-century art all across the state of Colorado. So welcome, Abby.
Thank you. So I'm just going to run through quickly, kind of give you the brief introduction to kind of set the stage for our debate and discussion tonight, talking about both kind of what was the historic context for the development of mid-century modern in Denver, then talking about what are some of the key features of mid-century modern design, and some of the architectural styles associated with mid-century. So the driving forces. So post-war US in Denver was really characterized by optimism and consumerism. Think about it, you'd had the Great Depression and then the war. We won the war, we were this major international power, economy was booming, and people really felt like they earned it. They earned a new house, new goods, new furnishings. That there was this, real push for, that technology was, going to improve everyone's lives. Everyone was going to have this wonderful, optimistic future. Everything was fabulous, and that really shapes a lot of our sense of the mid-century period and mid-century design. In Denver, we had a booming economy. The economy really started booming during the war. There were a lot of federal government jobs in Denver, and that continued after the war. And a lot of people who had actually come through Denver during the war for various federal jobs, military positions, ended up coming back and settling here after the war. So you have things like Rocky Mountain Arsenal, bringing a lot of new jobs, other development, science jobs in Denver, and you also have this huge boom in tourism in Denver after the war that really leads to this kind of influx in people coming into Denver to enjoy the great outdoors in Colorado. So it really kind of becomes this hub. And of course, the booming population. So in addition to everyone moving to Denver because of new jobs and the economy, you also had the baby boom. So everyone coming back from the war and starting families. So you had a 146% increase in population between 1940 and 1965 in Denver. So we think that we're overcrowded today. This is something Denver's been through before in the past. And this circular photo here I really love as an illustration of the pressure this put on schools. So this middle circle is 4th grade. Beyond it is 3rd grade, 2nd grade, 1st grade, and kindergarten to show just how rapidly the school classes were growing in Denver. And there was a big pent-up demand then for buildings of all kinds. So very limited new construction happened during the 1930s due to the Depression. Really limited new construction happened during the first part of the 1940s due to the war. And so huge housing shortage in Denver that was trying to be met. So certainly you could look at this and see that our problems today have also been problems of the past. And huge shortage of school buildings. So this is another picture from Denver. We used to have, in the late 40s, early 50s, all of our schools were on multiple class schedules. So this is the morning students leaving and the afternoon students coming because there weren't enough schools, so you had to get multiple groups of students through all the buildings in a day. Then there were also post-war expectations. Tying into that thing that people had earned this better life. They made it through the Depression and the war, and a lot of advertising really played into that idea to be excited about the new future. And after total war, total living, it's a promise for this new life. And so that really plays into this idea of the American dream and this, ideal, post-war housing that people wanted. And you see a lot of this in mass culture. So you have this huge growth in television after the war, growth in media, home magazines, and so everyone is really seeing these idealized versions of what American lifestyle should be, what the American home should be, what the American consumer should be able to afford. And so they really, these ideas really filter down and give everyone this sense of what they wanted, of what to aspire to in the mid-century home. And then, of course, mobility is really shaping things. So really increased automobile ownership, affecting how people live. They can live further out. They're not tied to the, Denver's public transportation and streetcar system anymore. And it encourages people to, move further out. So those were really the driving forces. Now I'm going to talk about some of the design influences. So when we talk about mid-century modern architecture, kind of really an evolution of the early modern architecture of the 1920s and 1930s, the international style. The international style was more of a high style, more of avant-garde architecture. We have some examples in Denver, not a whole lot. It was more of a style kind of, you get more of the elites on the coast, the east and west coast, really brought over by European architects. So it was really designed to exploit modern materials, introduce features like curtain walls, being able to have a structural steel skeleton that you could just kind of hang glass walls on. So it provided a lot more flexibility in design. And international style is really known for its functionalism. The idea that less is more, that you should strip down any extraneous decoration and just have the true building function, this idea of having regularity and balance without symmetry. So this is really the original modernism. Well, at mid-century you kind of see these modern ideas but filtered down and more popularized. So you kind of have this aspirational modernism, and at mid-century, it kind of becomes pop modernism. This is maybe a little too stark. How do we take some of these ideas, but add some color, and add some space-age motifs, and make it a little bit more fun? Another huge influence on the houses that were built after the war was the case study program. So the case study program was begun by Arts and Architecture magazine in the mid-1940s. And the idea was to inspire architects to design their conception of what the ideal post-war house should be. And they experimented with a lot of new materials, new construction methods. They really encouraged the idea of trying to use fabrication, be able to use prefab elements, a lot of techniques that had been developed during the war and able to do speedy wartime construction were incorporated into housing. And a lot of new materials that had not previously been used for housing were incorporated. So they promoted the ideals of modernism, including things like simplicity and integration of indoor and outdoor spaces and avoiding historical references, but not quite as stark as the earlier international style. Another huge design influence was the GI Bill. So all those soldiers returning from war could qualify to get loans for a new house. However, the government had some strict conceptions of what would qualify for those loans. So in order to get a loan, housing was limited in price. It was also limited in square footage. Well, so this really shaped what developers built. Developers wanted everyone to be able to qualify. They wanted to sell their houses to all those returning vets. So it meant they had to look for ways to reduce the cost and reduce the square footage of what they were building so it could qualify for the GI loans. Then this idea of the post-war lifestyle. The idea that your family life is built around the home, that you were going to entertain at home, you were going to have, that it was going to be the center of socializing, and also the center of family life. And this particularly is partly the thing of moving out to the suburbs. You're further out, and so your home really becomes the center of your life. So a lot of these ideal images of this wonderful life you're going to have, including don't we all want to cook steaks while we're in a suit and tie? That seems very safe. Open flame and a tie. So with that came the idea of wanting a more relaxed lifestyle. And with this, the introduction of materials that were supposed to be easy to maintain. People didn't want to spend their time doing housework. And so the whole focus of the mid-century period, a lot of it was to be able to have a casual lifestyle, enjoy your home, and to not have to put a lot of time into maintenance and upkeep. So there were a lot of new materials introduced to try to, this idea that you could just, wash your house, wash your aluminum siding, you were never going to have to repaint it. Your vinyl flooring was going to be, good for decades. So this really pushed of, using science and technology to improve lives. Supposed to make all of our lives easier. And then one of the big design trends is standardization. In order to be able to comply with those government regulations for the GI Bill, as I said, they were really looking to kind of streamline construction as much as possible. So they were doing things like eliminating basements, eliminating second stories, eliminating any sort of extraneous detail, as much as possible, eliminating hallways, standardizing window and door sizes, centralizing plumbing, anything that could be done to make construction faster and more affordable. You also got the opening up of the floor plan, so you see the kind of creation of having a living room that goes into a dining room that goes into a kitchen. It made the spaces more flexible and made a small house feel a little bit more open. And with that standardization, you also had the development of mass developers. So it's really only at the mid-century period that we switched to having the majority of our housing in Denver being built by large-scale developers rather than individual builders. And then you even have developers that are building across the U.S. So, for example, the Cliff May homes, which we have some of down in Harvey Park, these were available in multiple states. So you could have the same house in multiple locations. And color became really key. So trying to save money, eliminating all that other decoration in the house, so color becomes the way that you can really personalize your home. It's cheap, easy, affordable, and a way that you can make your house stand out from all the other pretty similar houses being built on the block. Larger windows. Indoor-outdoor space was a really key feature, wanting that feel of bringing the outdoors inside, and large windows also helped your house feel a little bit larger. So a small space, but a big window to the outdoors. And then having patios, or as they were often called, lanais, to make them sound a little bit fancier and more exotic. The kitchen became a central feature. So instead of being something that was just, off at the back of the house, you were going to decorate your kitchen as much as any other room. The advertisement claims your kitchen can now be as lovely as a living room. And the kitchen was now, had the counter where your kids could do the homework and really became a central hub of the house. Flexible spaces became really key here, being able to have something that's both a rec room and a guest room. Since you had limited space, really going to use, you didn't want to have something like a parlor that was only going to be used occasionally. All of your spaces were going to serve multiple purposes. And then do-it-yourself became really big. Being able to do home improvements yourself, personalize your home yourself. So here we have the gold seal Congo wall. It's so easy to install. You can do it while in your wool skirt and pumps, because it's no mess at all. So then the building trends. So of course the big one is that we're building out. So the map shows all the areas of Denver, the light blue is where the annexing was happening. So Denver grew incredibly during this period. And a lot of that then automobile-oriented development. So building out along those major arterials, Colfax, Colorado, Federal, all seeing a lot of commercial development, and then all leading out into new residential suburbs. And we get a lot of almost overnight communities. Thornton started out as a farm field and within a couple years was an incorporated town with thousands of residents. So really all these just kind of new boom communities arising almost overnight. Where there was a developer and a dream, there was a new housing development. And when they did Thornton, they thought this was so far out, no one was ever going to want to live as far as Thornton, according to newspaper articles at the time. But people were in desperate need of housing, and it was affordable. And so wherever there was housing, people would go. And now it doesn't feel seen that far away. And assembly line construction. So this is another photo of the Harvey Park and the Cliff May homes, which actually came on a flatbed truck and could be put up in a weekend. So prefab housing, that, basically the kind of the evolution of the earlier Sears kit housing. And then neighborhood planning, because it's the first time you're really having those large-scale developer-built, neighborhoods. You then are planning on this larger scale than you were before. It's not a builder just building a couple houses, but really developing a whole neighborhood. And one of the ways that they tried to make, kind of add variety is with the curvilinear street patterns that you get. So if you think of, a mid-century neighborhood versus, something from the 20s on our earlier grid, part of that was to try to add some variety instead of, just as you're building all your identical prefab houses, trying to add more variety, and also to try to make them more family-friendly. So this idea of slowing down traffic by having some of the more curvilinear street patterns. And going in with that neighborhood planning, they're trying to look for ways to try to make, kit architecture, something that's very similar, built on this kind of assembly line concept, feel a little bit more individual. And a great example of this is Chrisman Park in Denver. That is the floor plan for Chrisman Park. It's basically the floor plan for all the models of housing built in Chrisman Park, but they rotated and flipped the floor plan and added a different facade to the different models of houses to try to make them feel more individual. So they had the economy of using a single floor plan, but then looked for ways to try to make it feel more individual. So now I'm just going to talk briefly about some of those key types that we associate with mid-century architecture. So the really ubiquitous one is the ranch house. It becomes the style of new mid-century developments. So it originates in California, generally credited being coming from Cliff May, and kind of took its inspiration from kind of the rambling ranch houses of California. So really characterized by being a single story, kind of low, horizontal, big roof overhang, and really being oriented to the street. So it's set parallel to the street, generally has a big picture window facing the street, and an entrance looking out on the street. So it really relates, it's a house that relates to the front yard and really relates to the neighborhood. And then you have the contemporary style, sometimes just referred to now as mid-modern style. So popular in the 50s and 60s, incorporated elements of the international style, but really kind of made them into a more popular, accessible style. It's a style most strongly associated with Joseph Eichler and his work out in Northern California in the San Francisco area. And he often distinguished by featuring post and beam architecture. So that idea of being able to have a structural frame that you're just kind of hanging your walls on to provide more flexibility. So key features. Really low-pitched roofs, or flat roofs, or butterfly roofs, those really big roof overhangs. Often you see the exposed beams. You have irregular patterns of windows. And they're really distinguished from ranch houses as often being much more private in the way they relate to the street. Generally, the entrance isn't located on the facade. It's often kind of recessed and obscured. The windows that are on the street are often up high or narrow or irregular. You don't generally get the big picture window onto the street. Instead, the contemporary really focused on that indoor-outdoor space. So it generally had a big patio or lanai, sometimes a courtyard, and it would have a whole wall of glass that was onto that side yard or rear yard. So you still got, so its relationship was more private rather than having that relationship of really looking right out onto the street. So then you have formalism, so kind of the evolution of the international style. So architects that were disillusioned by internationalism just thought that it was too monotonous, it looked too much the same, that international style buildings everywhere just you didn't have any relation to place anymore. And they really wanted a new kind of monumental architecture. And so they turned back to the past, and so they really incorporated elements of the modern style, but brought in elements of classicism again. So sometimes formalism is also referred to as stripped classicism, kind of taking classicism down to its barest elements, and returning things like the arch and the colonnade to architecture. So some of the key features, having the columns for support. Often you see a very very kind of boxy, rectangular, in that you have a projecting flat roof, and you're also often have buildings kind of on a raised pedestal. It really has monumental qualities, and really looks also to use kind of sculptural forms and concrete, return of high quality material. You get a lot of use of marble and other high quality, kind of finishes in the formalism. And then expressionism. Our iconic sculpture house is one of the best, it's one of the best examples in the US that we have here. So this became popular in the mid-1950s. It was really architects being able to play with, new forms made available by new construction techniques and concrete. So really being able to make, architecture pieces of sculpture and play with those kind of, plastic qualities of concrete. And really looking at a way to be able to convey messages through architecture and have the design of the building reflect what happens inside. So being able to have an airport with this, soaring roof is a key feature of expressionism. See some more examples here of the expressionist style. Really unusual and organic shapes, complex engineering, a lot of sweeping curves. And then Googie. So this is really that kind of mix of popular architecture and roadside architecture mixed with modern architecture. So a style that's specifically, defined by its relationship to the road. So it develops in post-war California, built along roadways, meant to be really eye-catching. So used for commercial buildings so that people driving by, would see the bright sign, see the brightly lit interior, and, stop. So it really became a form of advertising. It was using architecture as a form of advertising for the business. So you get really dramatic roof forms, integrated signage, often using neon, geometric shapes, large expanses of glass, because you really wanted people to be able to see into the building and the business. Okay, so then just gonna wrap up with, talking about some of the things that are really challenging, the things we have to deal with when thinking about preserving mid-century architecture. So, how do we save and how do we decide what's worth saving? There is so much mid-century architecture. This is a period of a building boom. We were building so much. So our traditional survey methods and traditional evaluation methods just can't keep up with documenting and trying to figure out what's out there and what, those key resources are. So really trying to develop new evaluation and survey methods to really locate those key resources. How can modern resources age gracefully? Many resources, particularly commercial resources, things like Googie architecture, haven't aged gracefully over time. So this is former White Spot, this is out in Aurora, and you can see it's now a Mexican restaurant. Still has its distinctive roof form, but it's gone through quite a few other changes. And often when those buildings have changed over time, people just don't, they don't recognize them for what they were originally. And they kind of don't appreciate them because they've been so modified, and they don't quite have that vision of, well, maybe they could still come back. How do we save places that are hard to love? Styles like formalism, brutalism, postmodernism aren't ones that have wide public acclaim yet. Certainly, mid-century modern has started to come back into style, greatly helped by Mad Men, but things like formalism and brutalism haven't quite had their day yet. A lot of modern buildings replace older landmarks that are now gaining significance in their own right. So the real impetus for a lot of the preservation movement was a reaction to all the destruction that happened from urban renewal. And a lot of historic buildings were destroyed. Well, now those urban renewal buildings are more than 50 years old. Many of them are gaining 50 years old. So do we hold that grudge? Do we think because they destroyed a historic landscape, it isn't significant? Or do we start evaluating and looking for those works of urban renewal? Do we evaluate Boston City Hall and brutalist landmark? Do we start working to preserve that? So it's something that a lot of preservationists struggle with and aren't quite ready for. Modern preservation can be conflicted when it comes to sustainability. As preservationists, we talk a lot about the greenest building is the building that already exists. But it can be hard when we're talking about wanting to preserve suburban architecture. That things like contemporary style isn't very energy efficient. It's part of sprawl. So it can be hard to talk about how do we combine a desire to preserve mid-century suburbs with a desire to be more sustainable. How do we counter the perception that modern places are obsolete? We often get the argument that we're standing here in a spectacular preserved mid-century school, but a lot of school districts have made the argument that mid-century schools are obsolete. They often have not been treated well through the years. That contributes to that argument. This is one that's had all of its windows enclosed as part of the kind of 70s energy crisis. But it's a really hard push sometimes to say that modernism when the owner thinks that it's not functional and can't be updated. Integrity. How crucial are original materials when they've been mass produced? There's a lot of modern architecture that has materials that didn't survive well. It was a lot of new and experimental materials being used. So this is a modern landmark in New York that has pretty much had all of its exterior building materials replaced because they all failed. So how as preservationists do we deal with that? Usually we really look at materials as being key to the integrity of a building, but we kind of have to really look more broadly when we're looking at a lot of modern architecture. What is the period of significance? When do mid-century features acquire significance? So, if we're looking at something like some of those mid-century storefronts that have been added onto our historic buildings in Colfax, are those significant now? They certainly represent our mid-century history. How do we sensitively adapt mid-century architecture? A lot of mid-century is defined by its simplicity, being low-slung. It's really hard to add additions onto single-story contemporary style houses. And then finally, as we talk about that 50-year rule that preservationists often use as far as when we start to evaluate architecture as being historic, there's a lot of mid-century resources that get lost before they ever hit that period. But coming up now, starting next year, things that were built in 1970 are going to start hitting that 50-year mark. And are we ready to start talking about the significance of neo-mansards and the shed style and brutalist buildings? So that's what's coming up next.